Hello and welcome to Iowa Ideas In-Depth Week. Iowa Ideas is an event series that explores topics that are important to Iowans in various category tracks. This week we'll focus on innovation in agriculture within our all-new agriculture track. The Gazette would like to give a special thank you to our presenting sponsor, ITC Midwest, for their support of this event. Our sponsor support helps make the Iowa Ideas discussions free for everyone to attend. You'll be able to submit questions to our panel today by entering them into the Q&A box or in the Zoom chat, and we will work them into the conversation as we can. Today, we will be discussing plant sciences. We'll focus on how the evolution of crop genetics in recent decades has enabled corn and soybean farmers to weather a changing climate and new pests. We'll discuss new up-and-coming crop varieties, such as how shorter corn stalks might be a future solution to protect against high winds. I'm Jared Strong, an investigative reporter at the Gazette, and today I'm joined by Ed Anderson, Executive Director of the North Central Soybean Research Program, Mark Licht, an agronomy expert at Iowa State University, and Brett Wilson, who leads research at Bayer. And I'm going to give them a chance to do better, more in-depth introductions of themselves than I just did. So Ed, do you want to lead us off?
Happy to do that. Thanks, Jared, for the opportunity. Thanks, everyone, for tuning in. Yeah, as Jared said, I'm Ed Anderson. I'm the North Central Soybean Research Program Executive Director. I've spent my entire career working in agricultural research, and especially in the areas of biochemistry and biotechnology. I had the pleasure of, I was among a fifth generation family on the family farm in North Central Iowa many years ago, and went from there to both academia and the private sector, and then finishing my career on the public side. So really look forward to the discussion, and thanks for the opportunity.
Mark?
Yeah, so I'm Mark Licht. I'm an associate professor and extension cropping systems agronomist here at Iowa State University. I have had various roles from being in the field as a field agronomist to now where I'm at on campus doing extension and research primarily, although I do a little bit of teaching as well. I bring with me, a background from growing up on a farm in north central Iowa. And so have had that experience to go with. And then, of course, with it being a family farm, now I get to see some of my recommendations and how they hit home, so to speak, as my brothers and relatives are farming and see how they respond to some of the things I say.
Great. Brett, go ahead.
Yeah, my name's Brett Wilson. I work for Bayer Crop Science. I actually didn't grow up on a farm, but I grew up in Wisconsin around a lot of farming industry. I've been in the seed business now for the last 17 years, and I've had the opportunity to work in a variety of different areas. I started out my career in research, moved into the manufacturing side of the seed industry, and currently I serve the Williamsburg, Iowa facility in R&D for the breeding side of the business. And essentially what our facility does here today is large-scale seed production between corn and soybeans for the later stages of the breeding pipeline. We also have a tremendous amount of application for seed processing and packaging that helps support our North American business, but ultimately the globe as well. And so I'm really happy to be here. I'm excited for the conversation and humbled to be here with these other excellent panelists.
Well, all of our viewers are in for a treat because these are three super smart guys who know a lot about this stuff. So we're all going to learn a lot today. Brett, why don't you start off by telling us about some of your up-and-coming crop varieties that you're working on?
Yeah, sure. And I thought before we get into those, I kind of like to give a little bit of an overview from a crop science perspective in Bayer and what our vision looks like and why we're producing some of these new varieties for farmers. So our vision for future of agriculture and crop science is really, it's to produce more, it's to restore nature, and to scale regenerative agriculture. And I think it's because by 2050, there's going to be another 2 billion mouths to feed across the globe. And so our farmers across the world, but in particular in Iowa here, we're going to have to step up our game. We're going to actually have to produce more product to feed, fuel, and fiber the world. And that comes with a lot of challenges and a lot of stresses as well to the natural world that we're working on helping to offset through a variety of different methodologies and systems. And so a couple of those new varieties, although they might not be as applicable to our farmers in Iowa, they absolutely are to the world stage. So one of them that I'd like to highlight is our direct seeded rice. So obviously that doesn't happen a lot in Iowa, but it's a huge staple crop for a large portion of the world. And traditional rice farming actually involves flooding the field to help control weeds, which in and of itself utilizes a tremendous amount of resources, especially water. It also contributes pretty substantially to greenhouse gas emission as well through carbon dioxide and also methane production. And so we've created new direct seeded rice varieties that are actually more modern technology, very much more similar to how we would grow row crops here in Iowa, where you don't have to flood the field. And that's going to contribute to higher yields and also a reduction, somewhere around 40% reduction in water utilization, 45% reduction in carbon dioxide emissions, and upwards of 85% reduction in methane, which is pretty cool on the world stage for a crop like rice. The other one I wanted to talk briefly about is our hybrid wheat programs. So I think being in Iowa, we are all very much familiar with the phenomenon and the miracle that we have experienced in hybridization of corn. And starting in the early 1930s and upwards, it was a fundamental step towards improving crop yields on a single acre of farm. And just imagine what the world could be like if we could unlock that same phenomenon or something similar in a staple crop like wheat. And so our company today is dedicated to actually trying to figure out how to unlock that for the world platform. And we're very excited about some of those new varieties that are coming up. The next two I'll talk about are very much more familiar for our farmers here in Iowa, especially. The first one, and you mentioned it, is our short-statured corn. So the Preceon corn system that we've begun getting in the hands of farmers and our customers here in Iowa. That is an incredible technological shift in how we do seed production and farming in Iowa. And it's got a lot of excitement out there. So like you mentioned, it's a short-statured product, but it's really a systems approach to farming a corn in a very different way. And of course, if you're in Iowa, you're very familiar with the ever increasing variability in our climates. Even in the past 2 weeks, we've seen significant wind events come through the state. And we know that that's not going to end. We know that that's going to continue to occur over time. And so unleashing our Preceon Smart Corn system, giving some tools back to the farmers to help make their crop more resilient in those ever-changing climates that we're all experiencing is going to be a pretty big and exciting way forward in the future here. So and the next one I would say is our Viconic soybeans. So we actually were just able to unveil the branding. It's our 4th generation herbicide trait packages in our soybean portfolio. And if you're a soybean farmer in Iowa, you know the challenges that come with growing soybeans. We have a tremendous amount of challenges with controlling weeds. And what our Viconic soybeans does is it adds 2 modes of action to our current XtendFlex program that we have in our soybeans. So it adds the resistance for mesotrione and our 2,4-D. And that's on top of glufosinate, glyphosate, and our dicamba resistant programs today. So it'll be the first in the industry when it launches. We're anticipating a launch of 2027 right now, and that is going to help our farmers solve for some of those problems that they experience on farm.
Well, and pardon my ignorance, but so you're saying that it's harder to control weeds for soybeans? Is that just because they're shorter, or?
Well, there's a lot of reasons for that. We're seeing an ever increase in tolerance from weed species, and so being able to have another tool in your toolbox to help control those things, especially very common resistant weeds such as our water hemp and Palmer amaranth. Those will this technology is going to help control some of those programs as well. And it's really exciting. That's the stuff that's launching in 27, but our fifth generation herbicide tolerance is nipping right at its heels, in order to give our farmers even more tools to help solve for those problems.
And so you mentioned, we mentioned a couple of times now, short-statured corn, and you mentioned that that is going to, farmers are going to have to change the way they do things to use it to its fullest capability, basically, right? So what does that look like? How do things change for farmers?
Yeah, it's a great question, and so here at Williamsburg, we actually get our hands on some of these new products a few years before they're actually available for our customers. And our short corn products like Preceon, we talk about it as almost like a new crop, because some of the fundamental pathways for hormones in the plants are changed, compared to their tall counterparts. So in a lot of ways, it is kind of like farming a new crop. It gives us a lot of possibilities that its tall counterparts don't have, such as increased densities in the field. It provides the opportunity for access to that field throughout its growing season. So there's a variety of ways that make this technology much more high touch than what farmers are typically used to for growing tall corn varieties. But it also unlocks a tremendous amount of on-farm yield potential as well. So there's a variety of things that we need to do as a crop science organization to help provide our customers with the tools needed to actually realize that potential on farm. And some of that stuff is like seeding rates, right? So we know we can increase populations to help maximize yield returns per acre, but we need to be able to provide that seeding rate and that information for our customers. In addition to that, we need to be able to provide feeding rates. So, what kind of nutrient programs would you institute on farm if you know you have access to that crop all year long, all season long? And I think it fundamentally changes the way how we can grow crops in Iowa. And in addition to that, like because of the access granted to shorter statured varieties, we can be much more selective in how we apply different technologies such as pesticides or fungicides, to help target problems in the field, and be much more precise in its application.
Yeah, so if I'm hearing you right, you're saying that they can be planted more densely, and then they're shorter so farmers can drive over them basically while they're growing.
Right. Yep. Hmm.
Okay. And this has been a topic that's come up elsewhere in the week, but how does drones fit into this? Are you guys envisioning that that having that ability to drive over the field is still going to be needed despite sort of the rise in drone technology?
Yeah, the rise in drone technology and UAVs, we call them, it's in, there's no silver bullet to helping solve all of these problems, but it's another tool in our toolbox that we can actually access and maybe apply certain pesticides very targetedly in field over the growing season. And so we see it as a complement to the smart corn system.
And just so people know, even though it's called short corn, short stature corn, it's not really all that short, right? How tall are we talking?
Well, it's significantly shorter. It's about 30 to 40% shorter than its taller counterparts. So we're looking at usually around like a 7 foot crop.
And then because of the denser planting and the shorter stalk, when a derecho comes through, it's less likely to get knocked over, right?
Correct. It's far more resilient to high winds as well, which if you've grown corn in Iowa, you are very aware of what that devastation can unleash on a tall corn crop. So, and we've seen this time and time again since we've done groundbreakers with select customers here across Iowa, where it has been very resilient to high winds.
And even if there's no no winds come through and knock those stalks even partially over and get those ears closer to the ground, are farmers are they going to struggle at all to harvest that short corn product with their
Now,
current equipment?
yep. So in our breeding programs, we work to make sure that the ear height, for example, is such that it's easily harvestable for our customers as well. So it's a key component and characteristic that we're breeding for in the Preceon smart corn system as well. So obviously, we want to make sure farmers have the ability to take the crop out as well, just as easy as they can tall corn varieties today.
I was talking with my mom about this week, and she was bummed. She is volunteering at the food pantry today and was not able to attend the discussion. So I said I would ask this very important question for her, which is, why don't you guys just make the corn to have more ears on it?
Yeah, it's a great question. So typically, and I think maybe some of the other panelists could probably talk to this more scientifically, but when we grow corn crops, typically the top ear has the most yield potential in our crop varieties. Put a lot of the nutrients in the growth behind that top ear plant. So if you spread it out uh, to lower ears on the corn plant, you'll actually end up reducing overall yields at some point.
Gotcha. Well, I'll tell her it wasn't as simple as she thought it was going to be. All right. Oh, and one more question before we move on. How long does it take to get a new product to market, a new variety to market?
That's a good question. It obviously depends on the product. So different products take various amounts of time. But if you kind of started from like a seeds and traits perspective, when we make a new germplasm from the very beginning time of when we actually make a new cross, a new variety, and we get it through our testing programs, and it's in a commercial bag of seed that our farmers get to be able to plant. We're talking anywhere from 7 to 12 years of testing and production of that material, and upwards of $150 million to get that to market. So I know, being a farmer myself, we like to talk about high prices of inputs and seeds being one of them. But I can tell you from being in the business that there is a tremendous amount of care and quality of that product so that by the time it does get to your field, you can be very confident that it's going to perform the way we say it's going to perform. And that's a critical component to a sound and quality seed production process.
I just have one more question before we go to Ed. Sorry, Ed, to keep putting you
That's
up
okay.
so the rise of corn production in Brazil has been very notable in recent years. How is the corn that is being grown in Brazil different than what we have, growing in Iowa? How are the varieties different?
Well, from a breeding perspective, we tend to breed for the environments in which we're growing them. So, depending on where you're going, and whether it be Brazil, whether it be the southern United States compared to the earlier relative maturities, we breed products to be able to perform in the geographical area and within the soil types on farm as well. So, there's a tremendous amount of work that goes into tailoring the products that we're producing through precision breeding to help achieve the outcomes that we're looking for on farm.
And so if I took Brazil seed and planted it up in Iowa, what kind of yield would I get from that?
It probably wouldn't do very good because you're out of zone, and you're probably going to leave a lot of potential on farm there. So
Gotcha. Good deal. Well, thanks for all of that, Brett.
sure.
Ed, why don't you tell us about some of the recent, we talked a lot about corn. Tell us about the soybean side of things.
All right. Well, thanks for the opportunity. I would like to follow up, Brett. Great presentation. I really appreciate that. Yeah, you're going to hear and you're going to see, and probably most people already know, there's a lot of similarity in breeding programs, breeding strategies in soybean as there are in corn, right? Then corn are relative maturity groups. Soybeans, we call them, relative maturities, we call them maturity groups. In corn, good grief, in soybean, I'm sorry. And it's all kind of the same type of deal. We're supporting our researchers and our breeders in developing the right varieties for the right, not only growing conditions, but certainly environmental conditions, pest pressures, weed pressures, insect pressures, and all that sort of thing. So, right. So I just wanted to kind of comment that. So the soybean checkoff is what I'm going to kind of focus on, and I think the soybean checkoff is really neat. I've had the opportunity to work in university settings and work in the private sector like Brett. I guess I've enjoyed all of those experiences, all of those breeding and crop development and crop protection development areas. But with the checkoff, there's a couple of things that I really appreciate probably more than anything else. And one is the very integrated and highly collaborative nature of the checkoff. And the second is the fact that unlike poor Brett, I get to talk to anybody about almost anything because we try to make it clear what's proprietary and what's not. And so we avoid those topics and we talk about what kind of research is going to kind of raise the tide and lift all the boats. So I've broken down in my mind kind of two broad areas or broad categories of soybean research that have been done with checkoff dollars, complementing the private sector, complementing the public sector indeed, and in many cases working together with those areas. One is basic and applied research for yield, increasing genetic gain potential, yield potential, the quality of soybean. Soybean is an oil seed, and now thanks to biofuels and some of the other uses for soybean oil, it truly is an oil seed crop. But historically, it's soybean meal that's been most valuable and most important for feeding livestock and now aquaculture, fish feed, and other things. So anything we can do to support our public and private researchers in enhancing yield potential and the quality of the soybean that comes out of the field. Along with yield potential, of course, is yield preservation. So a lot of research is funded to understand how insect pests and disease pathogens and weeds interact with the soybean crop as it grows and develops and produces a yield. So we're very much focused on yield preservation, understanding the organisms, understanding the plant microbe interactions, and then helping farmers to develop the most efficient, cost-effective, and environmentally friendly control means and integrated management solutions. And then lastly, and you heard Brett say this, and you're going to hear it throughout, we're very much concerned about helping our farmers to do their job in the most sustainable and environmentally friendly way as possible. So those types of research topics get funded a lot as well, and I'm proud that the universities across the Midwest and others across the country are contributing to all of those areas that really provides a lot of discovery that feeds the pipeline for a lot of commercial development by the private sector. The second big area of soybean research is basic and applied research for uses. So there are traditional uses. I mentioned, meal as a feed and fiber. There's certainly uses that are now becoming traditional, but constantly evolving in the fuel space, biodiesel, renewable diesel, sustainable airline fuels. And there is a heavy amount of research and effort from the checkoff, by the checkoff, to really try and invest in enhancing current uses for soybean and soybean products, as well as finding new uses and new opportunities and new markets. And there are parts of the checkoff organizations not funded by the checkoff, but funded by other sources of funding that really look at international and domestic market development and trying to promote soybeans and bring more value to farmers and to the soybean industry. So if I give a few examples in that first category, basic and applied research for yield preservation, quality, sustainability, there's a lot of money invested, a lot of farmer money invested in genetics and breeding, biotechnology, for genetic gain and yield improvement, yield preservation, some of the things I said, for weeds, disease pathogens, insects, certainly, and then abiotic stressors. We don't really always think of in terms of abiotic stressors, but across the country, there are challenges to producing soybeans and other crops because soils tend to be saline, high in salt in some areas of the country. We tend to have soils that aren't the healthiest in some areas. We have, and Brett mentioned this too, we have extreme weather events. We have climates that are variable and changing. And so there are things we can do on the management side. Mark will talk about a lot of that stuff, I'm sure. There are things we can do on the biotech side. And there are also things that we can do on the genetics and more classical breeding side to really produce varieties, in the case of soybeans, hybrids in the case of corn, that are really tailored for the environment that we're going to put them in. So beyond just relative maturity, also in maturity groups, also really considering the whole system, what diseases, insects, and abiotic stressors are going to be challenging these soybeans, what's the weather going to be, and how do we help them to grow and produce the highest quality, highest yielding soybeans. I mentioned, and again, climate and weather resiliency. We can't change the weather, but we can hopefully anticipate and build resiliency into our soybeans. We are increasingly concerned and focused on water, soil, and air quality. And so we want to make the best use of all the nutrients that are available. We want to make the best, most efficient use of water. Because at the end of the day, farmers are concerned about maintaining and protecting the environment, yes, but the first thing they have to do is be profitable. And so we want them to be able to be as profitable as possible with the genetics they choose and the input management strategies they develop. So those new varieties should yield well. They should resist pests and other yield-robbing challenges. They should contain high levels of the desired proteins, oils, and other components for products. They need to grow well in whatever weather and soil conditions, environmental conditions that they are placed in. And they need to be the most efficient in using water and nutrients so that our input costs will be manageable. So that's kind of I think the overview and a little bit of detail on what are breeding strategies, what are research strategies for soybeans from the checkoff perspective. And I think they mirror well what the public and private sectors do.
And for those of our viewers who aren't familiar with the checkoff, can you explain how that works?
Yeah, sure. Sorry. So the soybean checkoff has been around a long time in Iowa. And I'm lucky to have had a number of years working with the Iowa Soybean Association, and they're great people on the staff and great people, farmers representing the approximately 40,000 soybean farmers around the state. But for many years, the checkoff was a voluntary program as soybeans were becoming more and more popular in the United States. Originally as kind of a forage crop and kind of viney and weedy and not very pretty to look at and easy to work with and high yielding. Farmers decided, this is a crop that has great potential. It fixes nitrogen. It helps our fertility systems in a corn-soy rotation. We can combat weeds and diseases and insects if we rotate with corn and soybeans. So they decided to start chipping in a little bit of their profits every year into this checkoff. Voluntary at first, and then 1992, it became a national mandatory program. So the national program is required. Everybody producing a couple $100 or acres more of soybeans have to contribute 0.5% of their income from the first point of sale. So if you take your soybeans to an elevator, that first sale, if I've got 1,000 bushels of soybeans, I'm going to put $50 into the checkoff. And then that checkoff uses those dollars for research, like I just described, also promotion of soybeans, exploration of new markets, communication of the value of soybeans, and discussions to try and figure out more and better uses and optimization of soybeans and stuff. And then, like I say, the lobbying and the influencing regulations and all that kind of stuff is not done by the checkoff. That's not allowed. But those activities farmers engage in through other funding sources, and they try and maintain freedom to operate and promote markets both domestically and internationally that way. So
very good. Yeah, and earlier when you were speaking, you drew a distinction between varieties and hybrids. Can you explain to us why there are two different terms for that?
Nope, you don't have time for me to talk about that. Brett mentioned the hybridization project process for corn, right? So, and he talked, the history and um, Henry Wallace and the efforts to make crosses by anyway. It's a monoecious plant, yada yada yada. So there's a lot that goes into describing how we hybridize, but it's a process of breeding and a way of making crosses. Soybean tends to be a self-pollinating plant, corn too, for that matter. And the process of making crosses for soybeans is a lot more challenging than the process for making crosses in corn. But it all has to do with how breeding is done and varieties versus the hybridization, the hybrid process.
Yeah, well, that's a good lead into my next question that just popped into my head just a bit ago. Um, would you say that corn and soybean advances have accelerated on roughly the same track, or has it been easier to have developments in corn, or vice versa?
Yeah, no, the answer to that is no. And we've actually, the Chekhov has funded a fair bit of research over the last 10, 12 years to really try and catch soybeans up in their annual genetic gain. So soybeans, since the 70s, soybeans have increased their yield potential by about a half a bushel per acre per year, whereas corn is around 1.7 or more. And the Chekhov farmers, farmers have funded really well organized, programmatic, holistic approaches in across the North Central region and leveraging partners across the Mid-South and the South and the Atlantic regions as well to really try and develop new technologies, new ways of accelerating not only variety development, but accelerating yield potential. There was a really nice bit of work done and published by folks at University of Nebraska, but in collaboration with a lot of other researchers and breeders a few years ago. It said about a third of all the genetic gain and yield increase potential for soybeans over the years is attributed to agronomics, and about two-thirds contributed to genetics and stuff. So again, I'm all about partnering. I'm all about integrated solutions and approaches. And we have to partner with the agronomics, the agronomists, and crop production, crop producer specialists, as well as the genetics, the biotechnologists, and the folks working on diseases and other pests. So yeah, they go hand in hand, and we have to do it in a way that's sustainable at the same time.
Well, you can answer this first, Ed, and then everybody else can chime in if they want. I mean, you guys have been at this for a long time now, and I know there's always advancements, but it almost seems like, gosh, maybe we're reaching a point where you guys have figured everything out. But what are the new technologies out there that are allowing you to make further advances?
So yeah, I give this a lot of thought, and we constantly farmers and these checkoff boards are constantly challenged with opportunities to not only try and understand some of these new and emerging technologies, but also then try and discern what are going to be the highest priority, the greatest potential for funding and investment of their checkoff dollars to bring new products faster, better to the market. So in my mind, any of the new technologies for crop genetics must include better, faster, more precise, and more cost-effective ways to create new germplasm or new parent lines or new varieties with desired traits and new genes of interest for agronomics, yield preservation, yield potential, industrial uses. We've talked about the other uses of soybeans, oil and meal both, and sustainability characteristics. So resiliency under drought conditions or poor soil health conditions or salt or whatever it might be. So, I kind of think about in my career, the things that on the molecular side, and some of them, of course, being biotechnology, right? So plant transformation and regeneration has been a tremendous boon to the industry. You heard Brett talk about all of these herbicide resistance traits and their importance for protecting crops against weeds and enabling the use of other herbicides. But remember, there's been a whole lot done to accelerate and enhance the accuracy and precision of breeding and biotechnology through genetic markers, where we sequence the genomes or large portions of the genomes for soybeans in our case and other crops by others, and then try to really characterize what parts of the genome are responsible for what and what these genetic sequences are doing in terms of RNA expression and protein expression and what the functions of those proteins are. So certainly the use of molecular markers for accelerated breeding is a tremendous boon. There's processes that are called genome-wide association studies for, again, further characterizing the genetics and really leveraging those so we don't have to just go out and make crosses and then wait for plants to grow and evaluate how they perform under various stressors and conditions. Everyone's heard about gene editing, the CRISPR technologies. These continue to be developed. Soybean, believe it or not, is a pretty recalcitrant, pretty tough crop to genetically modify through gene editing. And so those basic techniques and tools are constantly in development. And there are other things, right? On the genetic side, I want to talk about, again, integrated solutions. So we always are very much grateful for Iowa's big seed companies, crop protection companies, as well as the equipment companies. And Brett mentioned, precision application and field mapping to really identify where do we need to apply different herbicides, different pesticides, different fertilizers for fertility programs. There are in Iowa, there are companies working on prescriptive seed treatments on the fly, right on the planter, applying the right seed treatment that you're going to need in that plot of area. And I think we'll get to AI later, so we'll leave that out of it. But there's all kinds of really, really cool technologies, really smart people in this state. Part of them are, some of them are part of large international companies, and that's wonderful. But some of them are just smart folks that are starting their own companies here and using really new, cool, innovative technologies and techniques to complement all of crop production, not just on the genetics and the biotech side.
Yeah, Brett, do you want to chime in?
I,
Are you trying to gene edit soybeans and banging your head against the wall?
it's absolutely an emerging technology that we do intend to use. We're working with it today. At everything you said, like it is very similar in our industry as well, and it is, like you had mentioned, Jared, early that like the bar keeps getting set higher and higher, which is really true, and I think we all feel that. But the really exciting part is that like our technology and the tools that we have are also they're increasing at the same or maybe even a faster rate than we can raise that bar. So and I said this before, there's not a silver bullet to this. It's going to take a variety of different tools and technologies, but it's actually a very exciting time to be in agriculture right now. I think we're at the precipice of some very, very fun and innovative ways to increase our rate of genetic gain in a very prescriptive way and tailored way for our farmer customers around the world. So I think while it's a challenge, I think it's well in hand with the tools that we're building right now.
And Brett and Ed mentioned this a second ago, is artificial intelligence part of your workflow at this point?
Yes, it's something we've been using here, but I think it's industry wide, and obviously artificial intelligence is something that's booming right now, and so we're trying to understand ways that we can utilize that sort of technology to more rapidly advance our technologies as well, and so I think it's going to be a game changer in the way we actually do our work, both in a breeding perspective, but like all the other components that make up agronomic practices and other things too.
Yeah, Ed, did you want to touch on AI briefly or?
I'll try and be brief. It's like Brett said, there's so much happening there. But yeah, so just in a few categories where AI is really impacting not only soybeans, but others, but I'll focus on soybeans. So in the breeding, biotech, and crop development areas, there are all kinds of tools that are taking all this genetic information, all the genome sequencing data we have, and all the genome characterization data we have, and really mining that data to look at what crosses can we make. Years ago, when I was in the private sector, this capability was just starting to develop, and we called it in silico breeding, right? So breeding in a computer. Let the AI tell us based on this environment, based on these genetics, based on these gene characterization studies that you all have done. And this is a thing we always have to remember, right? None of this stuff, CRISPR, none of these technologies and techniques can work if we haven't done the basic research first to understand what it is we're targeting, right? So I would say that's an example, and there are others in breeding and stuff too, but in the interest of time. In the areas of disease, weed, and insect management, there's a lot of work being done and a lot of success being realized in scouting. So instead of people going out and physically scouting and taking readings on whatever it is they're looking at, you mentioned drones and UAVs and stuff before. There are some really, really cool and very sophisticated imaging techniques being developed and computational biology and AI techniques being developed to really look at things beyond scouting. So that data that comes from an automated scouting solution can look for integrated solutions and predictive modeling and risk management and ultimately decision tools for farmers and crop advisors so that they can say, okay, so this is what the data says, and this is where we need to be paying attention and how we need to be paying attention, and we're getting there. And then I'll let Mark talk about the cool stuff in agronomics and cropping systems because there's equal amount of really, really interesting things. The last thing I'll say about AI is really cool. So for those of us who help our farmers, and I mentioned earlier that, we have requests for proposals from researchers once a year or multiple times a year, depending upon what checkoff organization you're working with. We're going to try something new this year with the North Central region. We usually get 15 to 20 proposals, large, holistic, multidisciplinary, multi-institutional proposals in. And these proposals can be really, really technical. And no matter how much with all respect, no matter how much we coach our researchers, they throw a lot of jargon at our farmers. They throw a lot of technical details. They throw a lot of technology at them. And so we're going to try to use AI to summarize these research proposals in kind of audience appropriate and educational appropriate levels. Not dumbing it down. I don't ever want to say that, but putting these proposals in the language, the vernacular, in ways that are going to be very, very much more comprehensible and understandable by our farmers who are evaluating these proposals. And I'm really jazzed about this because I think it will help the communication between researchers and farmers become so much more effective going forward. So that's one application of AI that we're going to try this year that I don't know if we would have thought about if we didn't have so many good people contributing to the discussion. So.
Yeah, well, Mark, how do farmers keep up with all this?
Yeah, there's a lot to keep up with, and it has been amplifying, I'll say, in recent years, it seems like. So I do tell farmers a lot of times that, kind of go back to the basics and how do you evaluate any new product that you're going to be using, right? And, so I think some of this is, being, I'll call it proactive, getting out to trade shows, getting out to field days and workshops and learning and listening and trying to be as curious as you can. And then when you start to find, whether it's an equipment technology or whether it's, a new hybrid or variety or new management of some kind, right? Try to place it on your farm. You see how it's going to fit into your cropping system, and play around with it a little bit, right? We don't have to start off and do everything across 100% of our acres. That might be a risky decision, but you start off, in some of our management practices, we'll tell people start off with 40 acres. Just play with it, get familiar with it. Start increasing your learning curve and your knowledge around it at a scale that you can be flexible, right? And so I think those are some really important ways to get into this, ways to get started. I work for Extension, so I would say, yeah, come to us. We'd love to help you. But, Ed, Iowa Soybean Association, Iowa Corn, the big companies, they all have agronomists that are very technically savvy. They can help you too, right? And I think it's a matter of using your resources, right? hey, maybe even going to your neighbor, maybe he's adopted the technology and you just want to see how it's working for him, right? I think it would behoove us to kind of look at a whole bunch of different sources to really decide what's going to work for us on an individual basis, and how do we want to adopt things, right? And I'd be remiss to say, there's all kinds of other, I'll call them print and online sources, right? There's a variety of publications, whether they're, extension publications, whether they're, trade publications, newsletters, news articles. All those things are good places to go still. You can go and join some of the online chat forums. And just start compiling this information, right? Yeah, there's a lot of work in doing some of this, right? But I think some of our newer technologies, if we want to, so to speak, de-risk them, the more information we can learn on the front end, is the better option for us.
And how does our aging farmer population factor into the uptake on the new technology? I mean, I don't consider myself tremendously old at this point, but I'm already very much getting set in my ways about how I like to do things. So how does it work for farmers?
This is something that in extension we're keenly aware of, right? I mean, on a week-to-week basis, I could be working with someone that is 80 years old and still running the planter versus someone that's 25 and running it, right? And so I think we have to really, I'll call it multi-purpose our information. If I put everything digital, I know I'm going to miss, a older age population, right? Same point, if I don't start putting things on digital forms, I'm going to lose all my young farmers, right? And so we really have to be, adjusting and putting that information out in multiple sources, multiple ways, to be able to do that, right?
Yeah, and so, I assume the adoption is much easier when it's just a matter of like trying a new crop variety, right? So is that the primary way that people try to change practices on their farm, or are you seeing more of a shift where what Ed and Brett were talking about, having this more holistic approach to supporting the genetics with on-field practices? Are you seeing more of that? Are people changing the way that they fertilize and spray for weeds?
Oh yeah, we're seeing it across the board, right? And part of it is that the genetics allow us to change our management, and sometimes that's to help us be more, I'll call it efficient or profitable. Sometimes it's to help us on the sustainability side. Sometimes it's we maybe have seen some things that and I'll use row spacing as an example, right? Changing your row spacing is not something that you can do. Well, you can do it quickly, but it takes a lot of planning, right? It's not just the planter, it's the combine, it's the wheel spacings and all that. But then you start, combining that with genetics, right? One of the things that we've seen in some of our trials at universities with the Precision short stature corn is that there is the potential that narrower rows are, a benefit area. Well, maybe I'm not ready for that quite yet, but if I start planning for it, then these things start to dovetail together. And so I think there is a nice mixture of what can happen if we start looking at what the genetics can do for us and how that might alter our management a little bit. I tend to say that, if we go back and we think to when transgenics first came out, that really allowed us to change our management quite drastically, right? All of a sudden we were, at that time we had a lot of tillage going on, and we needed that tillage to help us control weeds, quite honestly, right? And so now we have some of these transgenic traits. Now we can use those herbicides, have low risk or low penalty on the crop side, and then it allowed us to shift into some no-till situations, right? And so that's just a great example of how that that genetic technology allowed us to change our management, and I see this happening in other areas. So right now, I tend to look at some of the things that are really happening on the forefront right now. I sit back and I say UAVs, they help us a lot understand what's going on across that field from I'll call it a per acre, standpoint. Um, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, we're looking at, planting the whole field the same way. Now we have more information at a smaller scale. Now we're starting to think about, okay, so what do I need on my planter to allow me to really advance this even further? And so there's just a lot of benefits that these technologies bring that help us out on the management side as well.
Very good. And just to go back to something you mentioned before, when you said a farmer might not be ready to change his row spacing, is that an equipment issue?
It's an equipment issue. It's a capital issue. Capital meaning financial, right? It's no longer a bag of seed corn. Well, I won't even put a dollar value there. Significantly less than a brand new planter, right? And so yeah, when farmers are trying to make these decisions, especially when it involves equipment, they're thinking about how does this change happen over, a period of time. At some point, they do have to jump on and they have to do it, right? But they're trying to make sure that it's fitting into their management system, their cropping system as a whole.
Gotcha. Yeah. We have about 10 minutes left and we have 3 questions from our viewers. I'll start with the first one. Where do you see the use of biologicals heading? Anybody want to tackle that?
I'll jump in, but I'll let Brett and Ed chime in too. I think there's a lot of interest in biologicals, and part of this I think stems from the emphasis on soil health and even carbon intensity, carbon models, but then also being efficient on the nitrogen use side of things. Right now, I would just in general say that I haven't seen a lot of great consistency from year to year, from farm to farm, to be able to really make some blanket applications. I think there's a lot of potential there yet. We just have to figure out how do we unlock this where a farmer can know that they can apply it and consistently get, that positive benefit, whether it's yield or whether it's a reduction of nitrogen or whether it's, a variety of other goals that they have in using them. But yeah, there's a lot of interest. I would say there's not a meeting I go to that a farmer's not asking about biologicals and when do we use them and how do we use them and how do we get the value out of them.
And can someone explain what we mean when we say biologicals?
Oh yeah, so sorry, I should have started there maybe.
No, it's okay.
So yeah, the term biologicals, mostly right now we're talking about either microbes or fungal species that are living, right? And so the hope is that as we apply them, they'll help those microorganisms when they're applied will help with root growth, plant health, nutrient uptake, things like that, right? And so the goal is a stronger, healthier plant that it really ends up leading to higher yields.
Very good. And so question 2, what are your tips for someone entering their first growing season? That's a big one.
So many questions that I want to ask with that, right?
Yeah.
So if you're entering your first growing season, start with the basics. So think about what's your basic fertility. So pH, phosphorus, potassium, sulfur, and then if you're looking at corn or a small grain, what are you going to do for nitrogen there, right? And so start with those. And then, really think about that planting system and those planting decisions. Seed selection, you will never grow your best crop if you plant your worst genetics. I'll guarantee it, right? It sounds kind of corny, but it's a decision that is made every year, right? And so really focus on genetics, focus on what's high yielding, what is what's I'll call it the characteristics of that genetic package, whether it's corn or soybeans or whatever, that's going to give you other benefits. So what's the disease tolerance or susceptibility? What's, if it's traded, what's that trait going to do for you? It very well could have a lot of benefits for you, right? If you have those, I'll use corn rootworms, right? If you have high corn rootworm pressure, you probably want a more highly traded, corn hybrid. And so focusing in on those, and then once you get in season, scout. I mean, I probably am more of a broken record than anyone. I'd love to see farmers in every field every week, right? Know what's going on, and then you can start adjusting, for what you're seeing. Maybe you can't be out there every week. Maybe that's when you have to tap into a neighbor or tap into a crop consultant or an agronomist that's local, right? Get out there and look and see what's going on. That's your best bet as far as how you're going to make sure that not only did you build that plant factory, but how did you maintain that factory through seed production?
Very good. And then final question, how can we encourage more people to try cover crops? And I'm going to put a little addition onto that. Are you guys developing varieties and hybrids that will interact better with cover crops?
So I'll let Ed and Brett talk about genetic development for use with cover crops. I can start more on the management side, and what I think about on that is it's again starting small and trying to get quick success. And so some of the things that an advanced cover crop user is doing, I would never recommend for someone starting out. Some of our advanced users, they're planting cover crops or multiple cover crop species. They're using overwintering species, and then they've really figured out how to do the termination in the spring ahead of corn and soybeans, right? From a new user, I'm trying to think of how do they get quick success, right? And so, a lot of times I do talk about oats ahead of corn. So let's just figure out how do we get it established in the fall successfully, and then let it, die naturally over winter. Ahead of soybeans, yeah, soybeans are more forgiving, not completely forgiving, but more forgiving, right? And so, I'm more willing to say, let's go with a winter cereal or rye. We can get good success and establishment with that. And then in the spring, know that we have to get it terminated, and if we learned anything from last year, probably need to terminate it the day of planting. So, the planter's in the field, hopefully the sprayer's right behind it, or vice versa, sprayer first, then planting, right? Just thinking about those, key management things and how do we do that for that strong success out of the gate?
If I may, Jared, I really appreciate Mark's answer to that. And I would only add, in addition to Iowa State Extension, the private companies and certainly the Iowa Soybean Association have a lot of on-farm research work that's funded by farmers, funded by the companies, and really, really helpful in this space. I think one of the key things Mark said in his good answer there was it requires a lot of customized evaluation and research on your farm, under your conditions, your management practices, to evaluate and get started in cover crops. And so on-farm research is a tremendous way to go, because you'll get some technical advice from people who really know what they're doing, and you'll learn a lot, and you'll be able to evaluate different species of cover crop opportunities and different management practices on your farm and your soil types, your growing conditions.
Gotcha. Yeah, and so we were about to wrap up, but I just wanted to ask Brett, if someone's growing cover crops, is there a certain, variety that they should be growing on their farm of corn and soybeans?
I think like the other panelists have mentioned, I think it depends on your farm. So a good and another thing to talk about is farmers are a wealth of knowledge as well, especially for that individual looking to start their first season. Like tap into your fellow farmers. They're the most brightest and intelligent people I know, and they will help you in that endeavor. And as far as cover crops go, that's a booming industry. We're coming up with new cover crops all the time. Cover Crest is one that our company is launching. That's a something that maybe can be planted as a cover crop after a corn planting and then harvested in the springtime to help with biofuel production, and then followed up by a soybean rotation. So there's a lot of really cool advancements in this space, and I look forward to seeing it increase in the years to come.
Great. Thanks, guys, so much for this. I'm going to give you my outgoing spiel here. Thank you, viewers, for joining us today. It was a great discussion. Join us tomorrow at noon for our final in-depth week discussion titled Creative Land Use. Tomorrow, the panelists will discuss how farmers are beginning to implement a variety of edge-of-field and in-field practices to reduce fertilizer runoff and improve the health of their fields. We'll explore the effectiveness of cover crops, how there is potential for additional revenue from them, and the best options for farmers. Thanks again to our presenting sponsor, ITC, for supporting this program today, and thank you for our panelists, of course. Don't forget to follow Iowa Ideas all year round. Our other in-depth weeks this year will focus on cancer in Iowa and energy and environment. And then our big 2-day full conference is October 2nd and 3rd. So please mark your calendars. You can rewatch all of this week's sessions on iowaideas.com/replays. See you tomorrow at noon for the final discussion. Thanks.